So the first trend that irritates the life out of me is the concept of grit. So this is coming out of the States but has become much more pervasive in the UK more recently. So Angela Duckworth's work here, it's not actually thinking about resilience in quite the same way, but it does start to build up a picture that I'm going to get to, where we're shifting away from that sociological model of thinking about resilience and starting to relocate it back into the individual and their capacity to do something about their circumstances. So I'm going to read this out just for the benefit of the tape. So grit entails working strenuously towards challenges, maintaining effort and interest over years, despite failure, adversity and plateaus in progress. The gritty individual approaches achievement as a marathon. His or her advantage is stamina, whereas disappointment or boredom signals to others that it's time to change trajectory and cut losses. The gritty individual stays the course. I can't even begin to tell you how irritated I am by that statement. So the gritty individual has an intrinsic interest in something according to the literature. They prefer long-term goals and they view obstacles as manageable. So view obstacles as manageable is important here.
So can I just
you can.
Interrupt? Don't you think that, I mean, you said it's American from the US literature, but don't you think that sort of reflects American consciousness and culture in terms of how the ownership is about the individual? Not
It does, and if it had stayed in America, all respect to the person who I've just been speaking to from America, if it had stayed there, I probably wouldn't be putting this slide up. Yeah. But it's how this is then starting to come into the discourses in the UK that troubles me. So yes, this is a reflection of the ways in which a certain sector of America thinks about the way of being. But you will see why I'm bothered by this when we get to some other slides as well. And it is starting to be used in the UK in terms of the actual term as well. There is some evidence being done in the States, as you say. Grittier soldiers more likely to do X, Y and Z. Grittier sales employees more likely to keep their jobs. Grittier students more likely to graduate. Grittier men more likely to stay married. They don't seem to have done the same research with women here. But it has been challenged because the more recent research has said that, yes, effort makes a difference, but actually having that long-term interest doesn't really relate to achievement at all, and that's quite fallacious. But then you start to think about, is effort alone enough? Then we move on to work by Dweck. So Carol Dweck has taken some of this work around grit and has developed the concept of mindset, where she argues that most abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. Brains and talent are just the starting point, though of course you do need, according to her, brains and talent in the first place. This view, the growth mindset, creates a love of learning and resilience that's essential for great accomplishment. Now, the reason why I'm troubled by Carol Dweck's work, and apologies if anybody thinks her work is marvellous, I'm sure there are aspects of it which are, is the way that this has started to come into schools thinking in the UK. You only have to Google growth mindset and school and UK, and you will see page after page, particularly of primary schools, where they have bought into Dweck's way of thinking about mindset and about the what mindset can do for attainment. This particular organisation here, Positive Edge Training, who work in the UK, say growth mindset has been shown to close the attainment gap. This is off their website. Can I just point out that they've made a spelling mistake here? So growth mindset has been shown to close attainment gaps and raise the standards of disadvantaged students. The programme that they will come in and sell you will rapidly increase the attainment and progress of your disadvantaged pupils. Now, I don't know whether anybody here works in a disadvantaged school with disadvantaged pupils, but I'm not convinced that just by developing growth mindset you are going to close the attainment gap. Of course, people who are more positive perhaps respond in different ways and do things differently, but I've yet to see the evidence that this is sustainable. But it has been, whole primary schools are framing their approaches to learning around growth mindset. underpinned by the belief that changing the way that people think can overcome disadvantage. That's my problem with this. It's not, it takes no account of the social world. It's all about the individual and changing the ways in which they think. So everything, poverty, family unemployment, ill health, everything that's going on in the family, that's the causes of why these students might not be performing particularly well, can be overcome by changing the ways in which they think about the world. So does it work? According to Dweck, again, a lot of this work has been done in the States, but not completely. Just by putting something to do with positive thinking on a website can actually change the ways in which young people respond. And she has got plenty of evidence to suggest that that is the case. And she's been very influential at the White House in actually making this way of thinking about the world being taken up in the States. So she would certainly say that she's got statistical evidence to show that changing the ways in which young people think does reduce the attainment gap, although she doesn't ever say it will close it completely. Dweck herself has raised concerns that a lot of this is just about teachers nagging, that it's glossing over mistakes, that it's being done very badly in schools. So she's concerned about how badly some of this work is being done. Whereas the Education Endowment Foundation, who I find quite a trustworthy organisation in lots of ways, have done a piece of evaluation looking at how 36 UK schools worked with the concept of growth mindset, and they've argued that teaching teachers about it had no impact on students' progress whatsoever. Dweck herself says, well, of course it wouldn't, because they've got the wrong sort of growth mindset. They've got false growth mindset. You can't really argue against that, can you? Whereas they were arguing that if you go in and take people who are really good maths teachers and teach children, things get better. So the jury's out, really. There has been more recent work. There's this work from 2006, but actually there's been some more recent work in higher education saying that a lot of what actually goes on in terms of appearing to support children to develop positive mindset is gratuitous praise, which irritates the life out of children and actually can do the opposite. And the work that's been done in higher education suggests that giving too much praise and gratuitous praise can actually make students do worse. So that's an excuse for everybody who's an academic not to praise anybody ever again. And then we move on to my third absolute irritation, which is character education. So Nicky Morgan, now blessedly our former UK Education Secretary, is very, very keen on the concept of character education. She argues that character education prepares young people for life in modern Britain, regardless of their background or where they grew up. This is evidence, and she cites Dweck, showing that developing excellent character traits can help young people realise their potential. Now, I'm not arguing again that having a positive disposition can actually achieve particular things. It's this bit, regardless of their background or where they grew up. So it locates the problem yet again on the individual to change the way in which they think about the world, and it allows us to leave the structure of society largely unchanged, because it doesn't matter where you grew up, it doesn't matter what your background is. If only you had the right sort of character, we'd all be doing much better. I note there's an event next in December, Westminster Education Forum, which briefs politicians, has come out of a desire to actually inform politicians better, that takes forward next steps for character education in England, and it cites Nicky Morgan's, that piece of work that I'm talking about there. And you probably can't read it there. The conference will allow delegates the opportunity to discuss commitments highlighted in the Department for Education's white paper to increase funding for schools to support the teaching of character education. So the funding is there to teach children to have better characters within the national curriculum, because of course if you're in a private school you don't have to follow the national curriculum, but that's because you've got the right sort of character already. Further sessions, God forbid, will identify best practice in the teaching of character education, consider whether the necessary resources of time in the school day have been made available to successfully embed it in the curriculum, highlight what's needed from character education to prepare young people for life beyond school, and consider the impact of character education on teaching and teacher training. Delegates will also consider the impact of the proposed expansion of the National Citizens Service to all 16 and 17-year-olds, so they'll all be forced to reform their characters. Yes, you may.
That was a forum that sort of provides information for ministers and so on. I understood it's a commercial company.
It is, but it's come out of briefing politicians, and that's what it's focused for. So it is a commercial organisation. But if you read the background, they position themselves as having political influence, and it was born out of the briefing of politicians. They now operate as a commercial industry, but that is what they position themselves as doing, and that is who their invited audience is. Other people are invited, obviously, if you want to pay to attend, but they have a very strong authoritative voice. They've become more commercialised over recent years.
He's been invited in higher education for a whole year there as one of the speakers as well, which is
A whole year?
Yeah, Anthony Selden. What
Right, so we move on before I have a heart attack.